Today, we welcome back the transplanter, Rita Crevachet, an expert in compost, regenerative agriculture, and sustainable soil management. Please welcome Rita.
Thank you. Let's see, do I get this? There we go. Well, I'm clicking on it. Emma, trying to bring it up. Oh, there we go. Okay.
It's coming.
All right, we're in good shape.
There we are.
Okay, so here we are. Great to be back with everybody. Today we're going to talk about irrigation. Now, there's various ways to approach irrigation. I am not an irrigation engineer. Yes, there are irrigation engineers. They are the experts on how to configure these systems, make them work, solve problems, and all that. That's not my area, but I can talk about the broader picture of irrigation, and we'll get into it. And I will recommend to you to when if you're ready for an irrigation system and you'd like to go beyond the basics, I can recommend some not specifically but generally that you can find expertise out there that can help you solve whatever problems you have. The entire process of irrigation engineering is pretty advanced at this point, and it's very well suited for the home garden. That's a big change that we've seen in the last few years. Now let's talk about water. We all know that it's essential for plants, and it actually makes up about 95% of their tissue, and I think that's pretty much equivalent to what the human body has in terms of water. But there are some essential reasons for the necessity of water in plants. One is cell structure. It creates constant pressure on the cell walls, and that makes plants strong and flexible, and they can hold up to their environmental stresses. And then there's photosynthesis, and that of course is essential. It's what plants are there to do, which is to convert sunlight and CO2 into carbohydrates. There's the cooling aspect. Now, transpiration is a word that everybody should know. It sounds like perspiration, and it's a little bit like that, but we'll talk about it more in a minute. But transpiration is the process of a plant drawing water up from its roots through the plant, and then eventually allowing the evaporation of excess waters out of the leaves. And then that process also carries nutrients, minerals, sugars through the plant system and nourishes the plants. Now, irrigation's been with us a while. Peoples about 10,000 years ago figured out that if they could deliver water from their nearby rivers or reservoirs, they could really boost production. So a lot of clever methods were invented, especially along the big riverine civilizations like Egypt and in Mesopotamia, where they just constructed canals and flooded their fields. Not a very efficient way to use water, but it really didn't matter for them, and it got them the results that they were after. Now let's talk again about transpiration. It's a critical function of the plants. The roots source water from the soils. Water moves through plant tissues, and doing all of these procedures that are absolutely necessary to the plant. And then as it draws up and in the hot sun, it will start to transpire or cause the evaporation of excess water, and that'll go back into the atmosphere. So it's a cycle. Precipitation brings the water down into the soil, the roots bring it up, the vascular system elevates it through the plants, and transpiration delivers it back to the air. Now, another key function of water in our systems is the germination process of seeds. And basically, seeds need to be softened and moistened. They need to absorb water so they can break through their seed coat and go through this process as illustrated here. It's a pretty straightforward thing. We all know about it, but it's something that needs to be emphasized as essential. Without water, it doesn't happen. Now, I want to talk about the soil itself because irrigation isn't just about adding water. It's about the quality of the soil has a lot to do with the success of your irrigation. Now, this is a photo of Ray Archuleta. Ray is a former USDA specialist in soil regeneration. He's one of the iconic masters of the regeneration protocol. And in this photo, it shows him with two beakers full of soil. One is soil that's not aggregated, it's just mud. The other shows well aggregated soil. And when water is added, you can see that the muddy side is just mud. And the aggregated side holds together. It's surrounded by clear water. That's what's holding the water. That's soil of that type. So before we even start to think about irrigating our gardens, we should be focusing on achieving well aggregated soil. And that we can do through the basic functions of the transformative garden, which is to never till the soil, no till, no pull, no dig, to use cover crops whenever we can, use vermicompost and worms as much as possible, and to apply biodiversity throughout our plantings. And those four strategies will result in well aggregated soil, and that will first of all allow water to infiltrate, and it'll hold water. And it's been shown that well aggregated soils do much better during drought situations because they're holding a lot of water in there. It's not even visible necessarily, but it's there, and it makes a big difference. And there's a diagram that shows kind of the attempting to show the well aggregated soil particles. Now, when do we water? Well, there's no universal answer to that. This group of people, of gardeners here today, is all over the country in different climates and different conditions. So there is no single prescription for everybody. But there are some things that we can use as guidelines. For example, if you're dealing with young seedlings, they have shallow roots. They're going to need more frequent water because they can't go down, they can't dig down and access deeper sources of water. So that's just a given that if you're planting seedlings, if they're new seeds, or if you've transplanted seedlings, they're going to need frequent water. Now, as you move on in the crop cycle, let's look at retained soil moisture. That's just something that you're going to have to learn. If you don't already know it, you'll learn about your soil and when it needs renewed water. A good rule of thumb is to dig down about an inch or two and squeeze it out and see if you've got any water in there. If you squeeze out water, you're probably okay. If it's dry as a bone, go ahead and water it. And so the answer can be very different for gardens in different regions. And of course, you've got to take into account local precipitation, which is always variable. Now, what are the application measures that are available to us? Well, there's the old watering can. I wouldn't criticize it. You know, if you have the time, if you're not inclined to learn or install some of these other systems, it's fine. As long as you keep up with the needs of the plant, it's just 100% okay. Same goes for the hose nozzle. Nothing wrong with it. It's all about whether you can spend the extra time to go out and water every day, whether you remember it, whether you've gone away for a few days on vacation or something like that. But there's nothing to disqualify these methods from use. They're perfectly good. But then we get into the more technical methodologies. There's drip irrigation. Now, and then there's sprinkler irrigation. And now these systems are basically similar, except for the point at which the water emanates from either the dripper or the sprinkler. But they're all connected by tubes. They can all be set up with timers. So, you know, these are systems that you can use. You can walk away from it. You can go away for a few days and be pretty confident that everything's fine. The plants will get watered. Everything will be okay. So there's a lot of convenience involved. There is some expense up front. You'll have to invest in these systems. It's not overwhelming, but it's an expense, and it'll last you for years. Now, drip irrigation it's a new it's a new technology. It was only patented in 1959, and it evolved over the following decades. And it wasn't until probably 25 years ago that it became universally available for gardeners. So now every garden can have a drip irrigation system. You can buy them complete, you can buy them in parts and assemble it yourself. There's a lot of ways to go. There's a lot of variations to it, but there are very competent and skilled irrigation companies that can help you with that. And you can proceed with confidence. You can find them on the internet, find one that suits your garden design and your way of operating, and it won't take you long. They'll just ship you a kit. You can put it together in a few hours, and you're in business. But it's a great system. A limitation of it is that it's operating in rows. You can see on the right hand. Well, you can see on both of these diagrams. The distribution of water tends to be limited. Unless you leave it on for long enough to let it soak up the whole garden, which should be done. And because you don't want to have dry areas. It's very good for situations where you're planting crops in rows. And you can lay mulch down in between them and it'll be fine. And it's the most efficient use of water. You will use the least water to get the best results with drip irrigation. And I recommend it, but it really depends on what crops you're growing and on your region. I live in California, and it's a good choice for here, but it's not the only choice. Now here's the other one, which is these microjet sprays. which plug into the same system. You'll set up that system of your tubes and your timer and all of that stuff. But the difference is you've got a little sprayer, and that's fine. It's actually great. It's really better if you want complete area coverage. So I know some gardeners that swear by this. They say, I don't want drip. This is the way to go. It gives me complete full coverage. But there are some things to be careful about. You don't want to water at night because it's going to get the foliage wet, typically. And that can be a problem. You want to discourage pathogens from creating leaf diseases and that sort of thing. But another benefit of that is that you can use it to cool the foliage on hot days. Drip won't do that. Drip is just going into the soil. So you can use that as a general treatment, not even to actually water the plants, but just to cool them down, program it to go off every couple of hours for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and it'll keep your well, let's just say it'll reduce plant stress, heat stress, and that sort of thing. So it's highly recommended. And then something you can do with either form of irrigation is add some compost tea and fish emulsion. This could be conventional compost tea made with standard compost that you just put in a big bucket, a big barrel or a bucket, and you siphon it out and add it that way. More potent is vermicompost tea. That would be the better bet. You would get more impact for the more power to the punch in a way with vermicompost tea. And then it's optional, but you could use it alternatively with fish emulsion or combined with fish emulsion. And it'll just potentiate all of your results. It'll give the plants a welcome boost, and you'll be glad you did it. And that's basically the presentation for today. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And Emma, do we have anything?
No questions came through yet. So I'll ask one to give folks a chance to collect their thoughts. This is slightly related. It's related, but I'll just ask. I know there's places like the Oregon State or University of Oregon, whichever one is the
Oregon State. School. You're probably thinking of
the land grant. Yeah.
Oregon State.
They're doing a lot of research into drought-resistant plants and plants that need less irrigation because of climate change.
Yeah.
So I was curious if you could talk about maybe what to do when there is no water to irrigate or there's not enough water to irrigate. Do you have some tips for that?
Right. Certain crops are going to be more amenable to that breeding program than others. There are some grains. There are even some leafy greens that would be appropriate for that. But remember, all we can do is find plants that tolerate low water, that have low water requirements. We will never find, because of what we talked about in the first section, you'll never find a plant that will tolerate no water. The plants need something. Right. So yes, there's some promise to that program, and it's especially appropriate for for low precipitation areas like in the eastern part of Oregon and that sort of thing. And it's all over the country. There are places like that.
Yeah.
And crops need to be selected accordingly.
Yes. Could you maybe say, okay, hang on. I have two questions just came in at the same time. Leola asks, how about planting native edibles that evolved with the type of soil and rainfall in the area? This way they should only need water when first planted. Could you know about that, Rafaela?
Well, I get the concept. I'm not sure specifically which crops you're referring to. If you're talking about things that are tuned into the season, well, that's very appropriate, and that could help you. It could help reduce the need for water. Some plants in that general category may not need daily watering, for example. So it gives you a leg up there. But I'm not sure what you're referring to specifically. If you could offer an example or two, that might help.
In the meantime, I'll move on to the next question. Susan Yoder says you mentioned manure compost. Would that be animal, not green manure? And how can we source that without possible contaminants from medications?
Right. Okay, good. That's a good question, and it's very important. And the thing is about transformational garden, we can't really segregate these functions as it has been done in conventional gardening. Everything is interlinked. So the compost, the condition of the soil, the microbial health, the environment, the environmental protection, the protection against insects and disease, these are all linked. So what we recommend as soil is what we call a manure-based thermophilic compost. Now what that is a compost that's made of at least 30% or more of manure, and it could be any kind of manure. And the balance is organic matter, typically straw or clippings or cuttings or something that's vegetative. Now there's a USDA protocol for preparing thermophilic compost, and that requires putting it into stacks and within the first 24 to 36 hours, it evolves high heat. Therefore, we call it thermophilic, heat-loving. And that process goes on for a few weeks. But during that process, the manure needs to be turned regularly. And there's equipment available for this. Now, I want to say right up front that this is not something that's going to be accessible to most backyard gardeners. You don't have the equipment or the time to turn it yourself. It's something that has to be done for us. Well, there is good news because in near most metropolitan areas, there are farms, let's call them farms, that specialize in producing this thermophilic compost. And it's pretty cheap stuff. You can go bring your if you have a pickup or if you have a station wagon, you can go get a small load for pretty cheap, like $20, $40, something like that, and come and fill your beds with it. You can fill your beds with 100% of it, though that's going against the conventional wisdom of horticulture. It's fine. I've been doing it for years. It works very well. And it will give you a microbial substrate that will be the basis for soil aggregation, which is so important. And this is how all these things link together. The compost and the soil substrate is very important to this process. So I would encourage you to look around, depending on where you live. You ought to be able to find a good compost manufacturer, and you'll be able to implement this protocol.
Thanks, Rafaela. Could I ask you to back up a step and remind us what vermicompost is and how does one get that?
Sure,
And
vermicompost, yeah.
as well as where can one source earthworms?
Oh, sure, sure. Okay, so vermicompost means worm compost, and it's the highest form of compost. I mean, if there's a hierarchy in compost, that's at the top. Now, it includes another step. So you would take ideally, you would start with a thermophilic compost that I just described, and by feeding that to worms, which can be done in long rows, or it can be done in worm tunnels that are manufactured. The worms will consume that material, and as it goes through the guts of the worm, the intestines of the worm, it gets invested with mind-boggling quantities of bacteria, beneficial bacteria, and fungi. So that's what vermicompost is. Now, you might wonder, well, why aren't I recommending that as your basic substrate? Well, I would if it wasn't so expensive. If you could get a yard of manure-based thermophilic compost for say $20, the same yard of vermicompost would cost you probably $80 or more. So there's a cost prohibition involved, and you don't need to do that. But you should always have a quantity of vermicompost available that you can add to your plantings, add to your rows, and that will make all the difference, because that will inoculate your soil just by doing that. Now, with regard to finding worms, worms are pretty much everywhere. You can go on Craigslist, believe it or not, and you'll find worms. You find somebody's got worms, and typically they're available from mom and pop backyard producers, and you can go and get a sack full of worms. Now, the worm that you want is called the red wiggler. That's the worm of choice for vermicompost. Other worms will do. Some people even use night crawlers, but it doesn't exactly deliver the product that we're looking for. So remember, red wigglers is the way to go. And then one more thing about worms. When all is said and done, it's good to add a handful or two to your raised bed. Get that bed populated by worms. Get them working in your beds too. That's going to benefit you in the long run.
And for those who are concerned about maybe possibly using non-native worms, what advice can you give?
Well, the red wig, I don't have really good news here. There are some issues with non-native worms populating, invading some of the forest lands. They are not red wigglers. As far as I'm aware, they're looking for solutions but haven't found it. I wouldn't say they're destroying the native habitat, but they are having an impact on it. So it is an issue. Now, red wigglers themselves, I believe, are non-native, but they're not going to cause those kinds of issues. They'll pretty much stay contained within your local environment, and it's not something that it's not a cause for concern.
Okay, thank you. Could you perhaps suggest some resources for how folks can find plants that need less water? And maybe even native plants too. Where can folks go to look for
Well,
those
I
sorts
mean,
of things?
if you're looking for just native plants or what we call xeric plants, Xeric, that means dry conditions, xeric. Um, xeric plants in general, there's abundant choices. But if you're looking for xeric food plants, it's very limited. It's going to be very limited because when you look at produce, you have things like zucchini and cucumbers. Those have a lot of water in them. They're not going to be easily replaced with low water consumption plants. So I would suggest if you're interested in that, you just look up um, low water cultivars. Those are cultivated varieties. Low water use cultivars of, of vegetables, and you should turn up some information pretty quickly.
Great. I need to go back to the worms for a moment. My understanding was that red wigglers are quite hardy and can survive the winter, but there's some concern in the chat that they can't survive outside. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, my experience. I mean, when you say winter, which winter are you talking about? Is it a winter in southern Arizona or a winter in northern Minnesota? There's a big difference. So yeah, they won't survive the extreme winters. They won't without protection. You need to house them inside a barn or your basement or something like that, and they'll survive that. So that's basically the landscape of red wiggler survival.
Okay. That's it from the chat for the moment. I'll give a few seconds in case any final questions. Enos says red wigglers can survive down to 30 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that'll get you about to the southern tier of states and not beyond.
No. Okay. Rafaela, I'm gonna switch to my screen now. Move to the last slide. There you go. I just want to check one more time. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I'll wrap us up here. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Emma, I
yeah.
see a question there.
One just popped in. Okay.
Well, maybe it's not a question, just a comment.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for joining us today and being a part of Green America's Climate Victory Gardens community. Together, we can make a real difference in creating positive change for our planet and its people. You can keep the momentum going and stay connected by subscribing to our newsletter to remain informed about our latest campaigns, events, and sustainability tips. Your support fuels our work toward a greener, fairer future. Consider donating today to help us continue our vital programs and initiatives, including these free gardening webinars. Every contribution counts. I want to say our very last transformational gardening webinar of the season is in a month on August 29th. There'll be a link in the chat, and there's also the QR code on the screen for that. I really hope you all can join us. And in closing, remember your actions matter, and together we can build a more sustainable and just world. Thank you for your commitment to creating positive change, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. And thank you, Rafaela, for this really wonderful, informative presentation.
You're welcome, Emma.
All right, take care, everyone. Be well.
Thanks.